You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
The year is 1600. In the Roman square of Campo di Fiore, a hooded figure stands bound to a wooden stake. His tongue is clamped to silence him. Around him, bundles of kindling crackle to life. A monk presents a crucifix, which the condemned man turns away from, not in fear, but in contempt. He has spent 7 years imprisoned by the Inquisition, and now the sentence is carried out, to be burned alive for heresy. His name is Giordano Bruno, and the fire that consumes his body did not consume the vision he gave this world, who defied every authority, religious, scientific, and academic, not out of rebellion alone, but in pursuit of what he called the infinite whole. Giordano Bruno wasn't merely a martyr, magician, or mystic. He was a man who claimed the stars were not lights nailed to a crystal dome, but suns like our own, each with their own earths, perhaps filled with their own lives and souls. He envisioned a universe without center or edge, a cosmos so vast that to contain it, God himself must be infinite. But this is no simple tale of science versus religion. Bruno's story is richer, stranger, and more dangerous than that. He spoke of metempsychosis, souls moving between bodies, maybe even planets. He revived Egyptian theurgy and Hermetic rites. He taught memory not just as a skill, but as a mystical technology. He spoke of binding souls through desire and elevated the magus as the true philosopher king. Bruno didn't just predict the future. He dared to live as if he had already arrived. And for that, he was excommunicated by Catholics, Calvinists, and Lutherans alike, branded a heretic, a sorcerer, a corrupter of souls. Yet centuries later, poets, scientists, occultists, and revolutionaries would call him prophet, martyr, and even saint. So who was Giordano Bruno really? A heretic burned for denying the Trinity? A proto-scientist silenced for imagining alien life? Or was he something more? The last true magician of the West, wandering through the courts of Europe, carrying the spark of a cosmos we're only beginning to understand. Filippo Bruno was born in January or February in 1548 in the town of Nola, near Naples, in the Kingdom of Naples, then under Spanish rule. He was the only son of Giovanni Bruno, a professional soldier in Frolicis Sorvellino. From an early age, Bruno showed exceptional intellectual ability. At age 14, he was sent to Naples to be educated, studying Latin, logic, and dialectics. He lodged with the Dominican friars and also attended public lectures at the Stadium Generale, University in Naples. One of his teachers introduced him to philosophy of Averroes, the medieval Islamic commentator on Aristotle. This Averroist influence, which held that reason and philosophy stand above blind faith, resonated with Bruno's own bold, questioning temperament. Enamored of the life of the mind, at age 17, Bruno joined the Dominican order. In 1565, he entered the Dominican Covenant of San Domenico Maggiore in Naples, taking the religious name Giordano after his mentor, Friar Giordano Crispo. Bruno immersed himself in the rigorous study of theology, philosophy, and the arts. By 1572, at age 24, he was ordained a priest and later that year obtained a license in theology. Despite his brilliance, the young friar's independent spirit and unorthodox reading habits soon aroused suspicion. He later recalled that the training he received attempted to draw from me worthier and higher occupations, to lay my spirit in chains, and from a free man in the service of virtue to make me the slave of a miserable and foolish system of deceit. This scathing reflection, written years afterwards, reveals Bruno's disillusionment with dogmatic teaching. Within the monastery, Bruno did the unthinkable. He read forbidden books and voiced forbidden ideas. He admiringly read Erasmus, a humanist on the Index of Banned Books, and reportedly even questioned the doctrine of the Trinity. On one occasion, he removed or defaced images of the saints, keeping only a crucifix, an act of iconoclasm that alarmed his superiors. In 1575, Bruno was formally accused of heresy for sympathizing with the ancient Arian view that Christ was divine but not equal to God. When a fellow friar discovered Bruno's hidden copy of Erasmus annotated in the margins, the Neapolitan Inquisition prepared to indict him. Rather than await trial, in early 1576, Giordano Bruno fled Naples and became a fugitive from Catholic authorities. He was 28 years old, and his life as a wanderer had begun. Bruno's first stop as a fugitive was the remote Italian town of Noli on the Ligurian coast, where he made a living tutoring young students. Over the next few years, he moved frequently, from Noli to Savona, to Turin and Venice, and then north across the Alps. In Venice, he reputedly published a small work on the sign of the times with the help of a friendly Dominican, but he could not stay long. By 1579, Bruno arrived in Geneva, a refuge for many Italian Protestants who had fled the Inquisition. Although Geneva was Calvinist, Bruno was not particularly devout in that faith either. He later told the Venetian Inquisition that in Geneva he did not intend to adopt the religion of the city. I desired to stay there only that I might live at liberty and in security. Protected by friends like the Marchese di Vico, Bruno donned civilian clothes and lived as a lay scholar in Calvinist society. For a short time, Bruno found the freedom he craved in Geneva's Republic of Letters. He even registered at the University of Geneva in May 1579. However, he soon clashed with authorities. In August 1579, Bruno published an unprompted pamphlet attacking a respected Calvinist professor, Antoine de la Fay, as incompetent. The response was swift. Bruno and his printer were arrested for slander. Bruno refused to recant his words. The Calvinist consistory excommunicated him, briefly denied him communion, and essentially drove him out of Geneva. In a pattern that would repeat throughout his life, Bruno's sharp tongue and impatience with fools alienated those in power. He left Geneva in late 1579, persona non grata in yet another Christian denomination. Remarkably, Bruno would eventually be excommunicated by all three major branches of Western Christianity: Roman Catholicism, Calvinism, and Lutheranism. Bruno next traveled through France, arriving in Lyon and then Toulouse in 1580. Toulouse, a university city, welcomed him. He earned a doctorate in theology and was appointed to lecture on philosophy at the university. For almost 2 years, Bruno taught in Toulouse, producing writings and attempting, unsuccessfully, to reconcile with the Catholic Church. He approached a Jesuit for confession but was refused absolution. His stay ended when fresh turmoil erupted. Renewed fighting in the French wars of religion between Catholics and Huguenots made Toulouse unsafe in 1581. Bruno made his way to Paris, by then under the rule of the tolerant King Henry III. In Paris, Bruno's fortunes soared. He obtained permission to hold a cycle of public lectures on theology, an extraordinary opportunity for an ex-Dominican. His memory skills soon became the talk of the town. Bruno could recite and memorize vast amounts of material, talents he attributed not to magic but to a secret art of memory. More on this later. Word of this magician with an infallible memory reached King Henry III himself. Curious, the king summoned Bruno to court to demonstrate his mnemonic ability. Bruno later recounted the meeting. I got me such a name that King Henry III summoned me one day to discover for me if the memory which I possessed was natural or acquired by magic art. I satisfied him that it did not come from sorcery but from organized knowledge, and following this, I got a book on memory printed entitled The Shadow of Ideas, which I dedicated to his majesty. Forthwith, he gave me an extraordinary lectureship with a salary. This extraordinary royal favor A paid lectureship in Paris gave Bruno the platform he had long desired. By 1582, under the king's patronage, Bruno published several works that showcased his expertise in the art of memory and his emerging philosophical ideas. These included De Umbris Idearum, on the shadow of ideas, from 1582, and Ars Memoriae, the art of memory, from 1582, both of which explain his complex mnemonic systems. He also published Cantus Cercaeus, a treatise blending memory arts with a hermetic allegory, and even a satirical comedy, The Candlemaker, from 1582. In these Paris years, Bruno rose in status from penniless exile to celebrated intellectual. He rubbed shoulders with powerful patrons and was known as an audacious thinker at the royal court. And here is a perfect time to cover some of his works: De Umbris Idearum, on the shadow of ideas, and the art of memory. De Umbris Idearum, on the shadows of ideas. De Umbris Idearum, written in Latin in 1582, was Bruno's first major work, dedicated to King Henry III of France. The title translates to On the Shadows of Ideas, and it inaugurates Bruno's lifelong focus on the art of memory and the nature of knowledge. On the surface, it is a treatise of mnemonic technique methods to improve memory, but at its core, it presents a theory of the mind and reality. Bruno introduces the work with a dialogue between a philosopher and Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage of Hermeticism. This sets a mystical tone. Hermes symbolizes ancient wisdom and the union of human intellect with divine knowledge, signaling that Bruno's memory art is more than a trivial trick. It's a path to higher understanding. Bruno proposes that our mental impressions, the things we remember or imagine, are like shadows cast by the true ideas. Drawing on Platonic and Neoplatonic thought, he argues that ideas in our mind are not the ultimate reality, but are shadows of absolute divine ideas, similar to the shadows on the wall in Plato's cave allegory. Importantly, these shadows are not mere darkness or falsehood. Bruno describes a shadow as the vestige of light, a trace of reality that is accessible to our understanding. In other words, human understanding operates through shadows. Our mind works with images and representations, shadows, that reflect higher truths. By studying and manipulating these shadows through a mnemonic system, we can organize knowledge and approach the light of true ideas. Bruno explicitly writes that shadows are the forms that reason takes during the learning process and can be used as symbols to organize the knowledge of things. Crucially, Bruno's system integrates mnemonics, psychology, and magic. He was influenced by the Hermetic tradition and by Marsilio Ficino's ideas about the imagination and soul. Thus, De Umbris Idearum doesn't simply list memory tips. It lays out a philosophy in which memory training becomes a path to enlightenment. This text presents an elaborate memory scheme involving a complex arrangement of letters, images, and even magical concepts. Bruno describes engraving letters A through Z and even Hebrew characters on rotating discs or wheels. These memory wheels can be turned to generate countless combinations of letters and images, a kind of mechanical aid for thought. In effect, Bruno created a proto-computer device for the mind. The practitioner would place vivid images, standing for concepts or data, into loci, places on the wheel or in the memory palace, using the letters and images to recall complex information. Bruno's contemporaries would have recognized that he was adapting and extending the classical art of memory that date back to Cicero and medieval scholars. But Bruno's contribution was unique in its scope and metaphysical depth. He believed training the memory could ignite the intellect and even the soul, bringing one closer to divine truth. In summary, De Umbris Idearum provides both a practical mnemonic system and a philosophical justification for it. The shadows of ideas are the mental impressions we can cultivate and arrange. By skillfully imprinting these shadows in memory using Bruno's techniques, the mind can ascend from scattered data to organized knowledge and ultimately towards insight into the underlying realities, the ideas themselves. By skillfully imprinting these shadows in memory using Bruno's techniques, the mind can ascend from scattered data to organized knowledge and ultimately towards insight into the underlying realities, the ideas themselves. This work laid the foundation for Bruno's subsequent writings on memory and knowledge, marking him as one of the Renaissance's most creative memory practitioners. It is no coincidence that Bruno's very next work, The Art of Memory, directly continues the project begun in De Umbris. And now we will move on to The Art of Memory. Bruno's Art of Memory is essentially a companion to De Umbris Idearum, often published together or as an annex. In fact, Bruno includes The Art of Memory in the same volume as De Umbris when presenting his ideas to the French court. While De Umbris Idearum lays out the philosophical underpinnings, The Art of Memory is more of a practical manual for the mnemonic system itself. It drills into the how-to of Bruno's method, showing readers how to construct their own memory structure step by step. In The Art of Memory, Bruno builds on classical principles but with innovative twists. He introduces a terminology of subjects and adjects for the standard memory concepts of loci and images. A subject, locus, is a mental place or scene, for example, a room in a familiar building, and an adject or image is a memorable figure or symbol placed in that scene to represent information one wishes to recall. A subject, locus, is a mental place or scene, for example, a room in a familiar building, and an adject, image, is a memorable figure or symbol placed in that scene to represent information one wishes to recall. Bruno emphasizes that each memory subject should be vivid and unique, and each adject, image, should be emotionally striking or unusual so that they stick in the mind. He even notes the importance of contrast. The background subject should not overshadow the details of the image adject placed on it. These recommendations echo earlier memory treatises, but Bruno pushes them further. He advises the student to experiment, personalize the images, and organize them accordingly to your own best methods. One hallmark of Bruno's mnemonic art is the use of combination and movement. He provides complex sets of images, sometimes drawn from mythology, such as figures from Greek and Roman pantheons, that can be systematically combined to encode information. In The Art of Memory, Bruno outlines a kind of visual alphabet or adject wheel, layers of symbols which, when combined, can represent entire words or concepts. This idea is similar to a modern person-action-object memory system, but far more elaborate and grounded in Bruno's occult and philosophical symbolism. He literally had wheels of images that one could rotate to generate different mnemonic codes. This method could, in theory, allow a trained practitioner to memorize encyclopedic amounts of knowledge by recombining a limited set of images. Bruno also departs from tradition by insisting that memory images should be animated whenever possible. He writes that movement brings objects to life and, under a hermetic philosophical view, anything endowed with movement has a soul. Thus, by imagining one's mnemonic images in motion, dancing, fighting, speaking, or transforming, one links them to the living soul of the cosmos, making them more powerful and easier to recall. This mystical rationale shows Bruno blending memory technique with his belief in an ensouled universe. Practically, it also makes the images far more memorable than static pictures. Finally, The Art of Memory emphasizes discipline and practice. Bruno cautions that mastering this art is not instant. One must practice daily, walk one's memory palace regularly, and refresh the images to avoid them growing stale. He even gives a timeline. Within 3 or 4 revolutions of the moon, you'll get results. Within 6, you should have mastery. Basically, 3 to 6 months of work. This underscores that Bruno saw his memory system as a serious endeavor, almost monastic in its dedication. The reward in Bruno's vision was not just a better memory, but a transformed intellect. The student's imagination is like a painter, working on the canvas of the mind, and with proper ordination, or order, and determination, the mind can mirror the harmonic order of nature. It systemizes the creation of memory, loci, and images, introduces innovative combinatorial wheels, and infuses the whole art with vitality and cosmic significance. Bruno is not merely training memory. He's training the mind's eye to see patterns and connections, effectively turning memory into a tool for innovation and discovery. This work cemented Bruno's reputation as one of the great Renaissance memory masters, and modern scholars note that his mnemonic writings were an attempt to create a universal tool for knowledge. The influence of these ideas can be traced in the Hermetic tradition and in the thinkers fascinated by the capacity of the human imagination. Emboldened by success in France, Bruno set his sights on England, the land of Elizabeth I, then in a golden age of Renaissance culture. In April 1583, he traveled to London with letters of recommendation from King Henry III. In London, Bruno stayed as a guest at the French embassy. There he befriended John Florio, a noted Italian-English linguist. Through Florio and Castelnau, Bruno gained entry to the vibrant circle of intellectuals in Elizabethan England. He befriended the famed poet Sir Philip Sidney, to whom he would dedicate 2 of his books. There is evidence Bruno interacted with Hermeticists at court, men fascinated by occult philosophy and science, and he was aware of England's magus John Dee, though a later report claims Bruno never met Dee in person. Bruno's time in England was one of the most productive and controversial periods. He visited Oxford University in the summer of 1583, hoping to secure a teaching position or at least engage the scholars there. In a series of guest lectures, Bruno proclaimed his support for Copernicus's heliocentric theory and expounded his own expansive philosophy. The Oxford dons, steeped in conservative Aristotelianism, were not amused. George Abbot, then a young Oxford scholar, later Archbishop of Canterbury, ridiculed Bruno as an arrogant Italian didapper, a small diving bird, implying Bruno was a frivolous transient. And Bruno upheld the opinion of Copernicus that the earth did go round and the heavens did stand still, whereas in truth it was his own head which rather did run round and his brains did not stand still. Another Oxford scholar, John Underhill, attacked Bruno for plagiarizing and distorting the work of Marsilio Ficino. Bruno, never one to back down, engaged in heated debates and responded with scathing criticism of Oxford's academics. He later described one Oxford doctor as a pedant with the manners of a discourteous pig, and he went on about narrow-mindedness of English intellectuals. Such remarks published to a wider audience caused a furor. Bruno failed to secure a position at Oxford and returned to London in frustration. Despite these clashes, Bruno's London stay was very fruitful. During 1583 and 1585, he wrote and published The Seal of Seals, an explanation of 30 seals, and 6 ambitious philosophical works, his famous Italian dialogues, which contain the core of his thought. These were printed in London, in Italian, the language of Bruno's heart, by John Charlwood and others. But first, let's talk about explanation of 30 seals. As Bruno continued developing his memory art, he produced Explanation of 30 Seals in 1583, shortly after moving to England. This treatise is a direct continuation of Bruno's mnemonic project, and its full title indicates its ambitious scope: Explanation of the 30 Seals for the Invention, Arrangement, and Memory of All Sciences and Arts. In essence, Bruno was offering a method to not only memorize knowledge, but also to invent and organize it across every discipline. The number 30 is key. Bruno presents 30 seals which we can think of as 30 fundamental configurations or images that underpin his system. This work likely included or was accompanied by diagrams. Indeed, a surviving copy shows intricate figures, likely representing Bruno's seals. These seals are mystical logic diagrams that encode relationships among concepts. They might be compared to Raimundus Lullis combinatory wheels or to Kabbalistic sigils, both of which Bruno admired. According to a Cambridge exhibition commentary, Bruno's diagrams in this book relate to mnemonics and logic, an attempt to fuse the art of memory with logical structure. By rotating and permuting the 30 seals, a practitioner would generate patterns that correspond to ideas or even entire propositions. Bruno intended this as a master key to all knowledge. In modern terms, it's as if he tried to create a universal encoding system for knowledge, using images and symbols instead of binary code. It's important to note that the explanation of 30 seals was published in London, and Bruno was very aware of the intellectual daring of his ideas. A contemporary report notes that Bruno's mnemonic works, including this one, were mystical works about logic, mnemonics, and the art of remembering, all part of Bruno's philosophical world. The word mystical is telling. Bruno's memory system was suffused with Hermetic mysticism, astrological symbols, and references to both classical and occult knowledge. Bruno's integration of memory art with concepts like the Copernican heliocentric model, new physics, mechanics, and the plurality of worlds is noted by historians. While explanation of 30 seals itself focuses on memory and logic, Bruno's preoccupation with an infinite cosmos and an animated nature was never far away. All these ideas chimed well with modern thinking of his day, yet also alarmed conservative theologians. Structurally, explanation of 30 seals likely provides the practical exposition of the seals. Bruno unfolds or explains each of the 30, perhaps detailing how each seal could be drawn or imagined and what facet of knowledge it pertains to. Because this work was published together with Sigillus Sigillorum, it seems Bruno split his presentation into two parts: a theoretical introduction, Seal of Seals, and a practical compendium, the specific seals. One French commentator confirms that Sigillus Sigillorum is the theoretical part of a mnemonic treatise, of which explanation of 30 seals is the practical part. Thus, we can view the explanation of 30 seals as containing the actual mnemonic engine, the 30 seals, diagrams, and instructions on their use for memory and invention, while Sigillus Sigillorum provides philosophical rationale. In summary, explanation of 30 seals is a bold attempt at a universal memory system. It extends Bruno's art of memory into a comprehensive tool, laden with symbolic images, the seals, that could encode the vast breadth of human knowledge. Few in Bruno's time attempted such an all-encompassing schema. This treatise illustrates Bruno's confidence in the power of the human imagination. With the right system, he believed one could penetrate all sciences and arts, finding connections and storing insights systematically in the mind. It's a vision of a total knowledge at one's mental fingertips, a dream that, while never truly realized, anticipated later ideas of universal languages and encyclopedic systems. And next we have Sigillus Sigillorum, or the Seal of Seals. Bruno's Seal of Seals is a theoretical counterpart to the 30 Seals explication, where explanation of 30 seals presumably lays out the mechanics of Bruno's mnemonic seals. The Seal of Seals provides a philosophical foundation, a deep reflection on how memory and thought work, and why such a system is even possible. Bruno is not here teaching how to memorize, rather he's explaining why the art of memory is central to human cognition. In the Seal of Seals, Bruno aligns himself with two major authorities of Western thought, Plato and Aristotle. He invokes Plato's theory of reminiscence and Aristotle's maxim. That to think is to consider images. According to one analysis, Bruno doesn't treat these as abstract aphorisms, but as clues to codified mnemonic practices throughout history. In other words, whenever philosophers spoke of recalling innate ideas, Plato, or needing images for thought, Aristotle, Bruno reads it as evidence that memory and imagination underlie all thinking. He thus proposes a theory of mental activity centered on memory. Memory is not just about retaining the past. It becomes an active, creative force that organizes one's inner world. Bruno writes that memory is a principle of organizing the internal sense, and indeed the entire soul. By actively structuring our memories, for example by using mnemonic seals, we actively shape our intellect and even our spiritual being. Bruno's approach in Sigillus Sigillorum also involves a distinctive theory of signs and images. He breaks from Augustinian tradition that often saw images and material impressions as lesser or potentially deceptive. Instead, Bruno sees images, the products of imagination, as vital bridges between the senses and the intellect. He connects this to the concept of intellectual conjunction, a hot topic in Renaissance Aristotelian circles, especially via Averroes, the idea of how the individual mind connects to the universal intellect. Bruno's stance is that by using images and mnemonic devices, the mind can more tightly join itself to higher intellective truths, effectively tuning the individual memory to the patterns of the universal mind. This ties memory to a quasi-mystical goal, the union of the thinker with the intelligible order of the cosmos. It's a very Neoplatonic idea, where the human soul can ascend and reunite with the One, dressed in the terminology of memory science. Sigillus Sigillorum also provides a brief look at Raymond Lull's art and Bruno's take on it. Lull's Ars Magna was a medieval combinatorial system aimed at logical and theological discovery. Bruno was inspired by Lull's ideas of rotating figures to generate concepts, and in Sigillus Sigillorum, he offers a quick presentation of the deduction of Lull's art interpreted as an instrument of invention. Bruno essentially repurposes Lull's combinatorial logic with his own memory system. Lull's wheels become tools for creativity as much as for memory. By calling his work the Seal of Seals, Bruno implies that his theory is the seal that validates all other seals, his 30 seals and any other system of knowledge. It's the meta-seal, the guarantor that the method works, grounded in the nature of thought itself. To illustrate Bruno's thinking, he argues that whenever we recall one thing and it makes us think of another, say seeing a photograph reminds you of the event it depicts, we are exercising the fundamental power of memory that underlies thought. His art of memory is a deliberate amplification of this natural power. Furthermore, by populating the mind with powerful images, which he often drew from mystical or divine names, as Bruno was known to incorporate astrological and Kabbalistic symbols into his seals, we align our mind with the living forces of nature. Bruno was indeed influenced by the Hermetic notion that nature is God in things, and that by impressing natural and celestial symbols into memory, we partake in the divine order. In summary, Sigillus Sigillorum can be seen as Bruno's manifesto on the power of memory and imagination. It inserts that memory is not a passive storage, but an active, generative faculty that, when harnessed, elevates the intellect and even the soul. This work links Bruno's mnemonic art to his broader philosophical and magical ideas, showing a unity between knowing and being. Little wonder that later scholars like Francis Yates found Bruno's memory theories pivotal. He was bridging the gap between the inner cosmos of the mind and the outer cosmos of nature, with memory as the connecting seal. And now, on to his Italian dialogues. First, we have the Ash Wednesday Supper, published in 1584, a cosmological and comic dialogue set at an Ash Wednesday dinner in London. Here Bruno, in the character of Nolan, the man from Nola, explains and defends Copernican heliocentrism to two skeptical Oxford mathematicians. Bruno portrays his English scholarly opponents as absurd pedants, and he mingles philosophical arguments with personal satire. This earned him notoriety for insulting English pride. The Ash Wednesday Supper is notable for presenting Bruno's early assertion that the universe is infinite and that the stars are other suns with their own planets. And then we have On Cause, Principle and Unity from 1584, a deeper metaphysical dialogue examining the nature of the universe's first causes and fundamental unity. Published shortly after the uproar over the Ash Wednesday Supper, it opens with an apologia in which Bruno, addressing the mathematicians of Oxford, half-heartedly retracts the tone of his previous statements while justifying his critique. In the dialogue itself, Bruno argues for an immanent God and a unity of substance. All reality is one, an expression of the infinite divine principle. He revives aspects of Neoplatonism and Renaissance Hermetic thought, proposing that the universe and God are inseparable, a view that borders on pantheism. This next one we're going to cover a little more extensively. And that one is On the Infinite Universe and Worlds from 1584. This is one of Bruno's most famous and visionary writings. It consists of 5 dialogues and represents Bruno's cosmological masterpiece in the Italian language. In these dialogues, Bruno passionately argues for a view of the cosmos that was radically new. The universe is infinite. It has no center, and it contains innumerable worlds like our own. At this time, the dominant cosmology was still the Aristotelian Ptolemaic model, a finite universe with the Earth at the center, surrounded by nested crystalline spheres carrying the planets and the fixed stars, often likened to an onion of concentric shells. Copernicus had published his heliocentric theory in 1543, placing the sun at the center of the universe with Earth as just another planet. But Copernicism was still controversial and mostly treated as a computational convenience by astronomers, not a physical reality. Bruno seized upon Copernicus's idea and went much further. On the infinite of the universe and worlds, he declares not only does the Earth move around the sun, but the Copernican model implies a limitless universe. If the old idea of a fixed sphere of stars is an illusion due to Earth's rotation, as Copernicus said, then there is no edge to the cosmos at all. In quotes, the universe was not a finite globe composed of concentric spheres. Instead, it was an infinite, homogeneous expanse, populated by an infinite number of solar systems like our own. Bruno triumphantly compares this conceptual revolution to great voyages. Just as Columbus discovered new continents on Earth, Bruno claims to have discovered countless worlds in this universe. One of Bruno's key contentions in these dialogues is that the stars we see at night are themselves suns, each potentially surrounded by their own planets or Earths. Therefore, our sun is just one star among an infinity, and our Earth one world among an infinite plurality of worlds. This destroyed the unique status of Earth, and by extension challenged the unique status of man in the cosmos, a deeply unsettling idea for the orthodox mindset. Bruno bolsters his cosmology with multiple lines of reasoning, philosophical, empirical, and even theological. Philosophically, he argues there's no reason nature would limit itself to a single closed system. If it's possible for there to be many worlds, then in an infinite universe, all possibilities must be realized. He often insisted that in an infinite creation, what is possible and reasonable must also be actual. Empirically, he points to the new telescopic observations just emerging, and the inadequacy of the naked eye astronomy to discern any boundary. The stars could be at vast, varying distance in a huge void. Theologically, he makes the claim: God's omnipotence and infinite fecundity would be limited if creation had an end. A finite universe would not do justice to an infinite God, whereas an infinite universe with endless worlds is a truer manifestation of divine greatness. Bruno even cites biblical hints, like the verse in Daniel about God's throne attended by thousands upon thousands of angels, which he interprets as meaning countless celestial bodies. The dialogues are written with dramatic flair. Bruno often uses a character named Philotheus or Philotheus, lover of truth, who essentially speaks for Bruno's own views, and pits him against pedants who defend old cosmology. Though witty and fiery exchanges, Bruno addresses and demolishes common objections of the time. For instance, Aristotelians argue that an infinite cosmos is impossible because then an outer sphere would have to move infinitely fast, or a stone moved far from Earth wouldn't know where to fall if multiple centers existed. Bruno replies that these objections lose force once you remove the Earth from the cosmic center. In an infinite universe, there is no absolute up or down, no absolute center. Every observer can consider themselves at the center of their own horizon, and motion is relative. Bruno intuits a form of principle of relativity. Since the Earth is moving, what we call up or down is just relative to our position, and likewise for any world. Each world has its own center of gravity, and objects are attracted to their local worlds by any kind of universal natural attraction. Bruno discussed a form of gravitational theory, noting that parts are drawn to wholes, anticipating ideas Galileo and Newton would explore. He even compares the endless distribution of stars to specks of dust in a sunbeam, appearing dense near the source and sparser further away, but truly filling an undefined expanse. Another daring aspect of Bruno's cosmology in these dialogues is his idea that the universe is one eternal living organism. He famously asserted that the Earth and everything else is animated with soul as the center of every part. In Bruno's view, each star and each planet is a living entity with an internal principle causing its motion. He extends the concept of soul, which Aristotelians reserved for living beings. Hence, the stars move not because they're pushed by crystal spheres or angels, but because they are self-moving living things. This is the world soul hypothesis, a form of pantheism where God is immanent in nature and every part of the universe is infused with life and divinity. Bruno's character Philotheus declares that nature is God in things, collapsing the distance between creator and creation. Such statements edge towards heresy. They imply God is not a distant creator outside the world, but essentially the world itself and its infinite extension. On the Infinite Universe and Worlds presents an entire new cosmic paradigm. It was a philosophical manifesto as much as a cosmological one. The work did not go unnoticed or uncriticized. While in England, Bruno's cosmology intrigued some. He had admirers among the Sydney Circle and others, but it also shocked conservative scholars. Years later, during Bruno's trial by the Inquisition, his assertion of innumerable worlds and an infinite universe was listed among the charges of heresy, not because the church had formally condemned Copernicus yet, it had it in Bruno's time, but because of the theological implications of Bruno's infinity. Multiple worlds raised questions like, did Christ redeem other worlds too, or their multiple incarnations, etc. Bruno, however, was unrepentant in his vision. He believed that he had glimpsed a truth far greater than the closed vault imagined by antiquity. On the Infinite Universe and Worlds stands today as a remarkably piece of work. It anticipated the modern view that space is boundless and filled with countless galaxies, worlds upon worlds. Though, of course, Bruno arrived at this by philosophical insight rather than scientific telescopes. In literature and philosophy, Bruno's infinite universe would inspire and trouble thinkers for centuries to come. And then we have The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast from 1584. And that's an allegorical satire. It imagines the Olympian gods, with Jupiter presiding, deciding to reform the heavens by expelling the constellations, conceived as animals representing vices and replacing them with new symbols of virtue. Through this symbolic cleansing of the sky, Bruno critiques the moral corruption of this time and especially pokes fun at the hypocrisies of organized religion. The triumphant beast in the title is often interpreted as ignorance and superstition, or sometimes the Roman Church itself, that must be cast out. The dialogue draws on Bruno's extensive knowledge of classical mythology, astrology, and Hermetic symbolism. In one notable passage, Bruno, through the figure of wisdom, argues that the gods do not require worship for their own sake. It is an unworthy, foolish, profane, and reprehensible thing to think that the gods demand reverence, fear, love, worship, and respect for any other good end or utility than those of men themselves, inasmuch as being perfectly glorious in themselves. Such statements reveal Bruno's belief that religion should serve moral and philosophical elevation. And then we have the Cabal of Pegasus from 1585. This is a satire in which Bruno uses the form of a mock dialogue to ridicule the pedantry of philosophers and theologians. The title literally means Cabal of the Horse Pegasus. And in this work, Bruno imagines a discourse involving a donkey and Pegasus, the winged horse of lore. It is a parody of foolish learning, Bruno's jabs at those who cling to asinine doctrines. Beneath the humor, the Kabbalah also contains serious discussions on the nature of the soul and the autobiographical venting of Bruno's frustrations with academia. And then we have the Heroic Frenzies from 1585. Bruno's final London dialogue, a poetic and philosophical meditation on enthusiasm and the ecstatic pursuit of truth. Written as a series of love poems with accompanying commentary in dialogue form, the Heroic Frenzies uses the metaphor of love's madness as an analog for the soul's quest for the divine. Bruno describes the heroic lover, the philosopher or poet, as one driven to seeming madness by an insatiable desire for the infinite. He writes, "Heroic love is proper to higher natures, calling insane not because they do not know, but because they know beyond the ordinary." Bruno's Heroic Frenzies is filled with Hermetic, Platonic, and mystical imagery, celebrating intellectual passion as a form of divine furor or fury. It stands as a unique Renaissance work fusing literature and philosophy, and its style, alternating verse and learned explication, underscores Bruno's belief that poetry and myth are as vital as logic for grasping truth. Bruno's Italian dialogues in England secured his reputation, for better and worse. They circulated his bold cosmological and philosophical ideas to a broader European audience, but they also offended many. In these works, Bruno openly insulted the pedants of Oxford and more generally railed against the arrogance of those who clung to Aristotle and scorned new ideas. As a result, by 1585, Bruno had strained the hospitality of his London patrons. The French ambassador who had sheltered him was recalled to France in October 1585, and Bruno left England in his company. According to one theory, proposed by historian John Bossy, during Bruno's time in London, he may have also been acting as a spy for Queen Elizabeth's spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham. Bossy speculates that Bruno's stay at the French embassy allowed him to gather information on Catholic conspirators using the code name Henry Faggot. Whether or not Bruno was a secret informer, by the time he departed England, his bridges there were burned. He had, however, achieved something lasting. Bruno left England having published an unprecedented vision of an infinite cosmos and a sweeping critique of accepted wisdom, works that would inspire thinkers for generations to come. It is notable that an attendee at Bruno's Oxford talks, the student Francis Godwin, went on to write one of the first science fiction stories in English, The Man in the Moon, in 1638, about a journey to an inhabited moon, a tale arguably influenced by Bruno's cosmic imagination. When Bruno returned to Paris in late 1585, he walked into a tense political and religious atmosphere. France was in the throes of the Catholic-Huguenot conflict, the War of the Three Henries. The tolerant King Henry III was under pressure from the ultra-Catholic League. Bruno found that the intellectual freedom he had enjoyed a few years earlier had evaporated. Characteristically, he soon provoked the French scholars. Bruno composed a set of 120 theses attacking Aristotle's natural philosophy and challenged all comers to a public debate. In 1585, during a disputation at the College of Cambrai in Paris, a violent quarrel broke out between Bruno and a champion of Aristotelian orthodoxy. The dispute degenerated, and Bruno, who had once again made powerful enemies, decided it was prudent to leave France. During this time, he did write The Interpretation of the Dream in 1586, which I do think is worth mentioning for a bit. The Interpretation of the Dream is a less known but fascinating dialogue written in 1586, after Bruno had returned to France from England. It forms a part of a group of Latin dialogues Bruno composed in Paris, which also included Idiota Triumphans, the triumphant idiot, or illiterate, and also Mordentius and De Mordenti Circino, all published around the same time. These dialogues are born from Bruno's intellectual conflicts in France, particularly a dispute with the Italian mathematician Fabrizio Mordente over a new mathematical instrument, Mordente's proportional compass. What makes this book unique is its allegorical framework. Bruno uses a scenario of interpreting a dream as a creative vehicle to convey his philosophical message. In this dialogue, Bruno essentially stages a dream and then has the characters interpret its meaning, using that it as an opportunity to expound his own ideas. In this dialogue, Bruno essentially stages a dream, and then he has the characters interpret its meaning, using that as an opportunity to expound his own ideas. The dream imagery likely allowed Bruno to satirize and criticize his targets with some veil of fiction. According to historical letters, by this time Bruno was furiously at odds with Mordente and also taking bold shots at Aristotelian scholastics in Paris. A contemporary account by the scholar Giambattista Corbinelli, writing in June 1586, notes that Bruno had published dialogues, including one on the dream, and is engaged in destroying the whole of the Aristotelian philosophy, delivering his arguments vigorously. The same letter calls Bruno the Nolan, after his birthplace Nola, and describes him as an Epicurean in his way of life, who had caused schisms in academic circles, painting a picture of Bruno as a provocative, combative figure shaking up orthodox academia. So what is this book about? Why the detailed content is obscure, the dialogue itself is not as widely available as Bruno's cosmological works. We can infer some themes. It is the fourth dialogue in the Mordente cycle, meaning it was likely the culmination of Bruno's response to Mordente. Mordente had invented a compass able to divide intervals into fractions. Bruno initially praised Mordente's device, but then claimed Mordente didn't grasp its deeper philosophical implications. In this book, Bruno probably uses a dream narrative to illustrate his philosophical point of view about the infinite divisibility of space, or the concept of the minimum. One academic source suggests Bruno was exploring the possibility of law of motion that could account for both circular and linear motion in these dialogues. It's plausible the dream in question featured some symbolic scenario, perhaps an encounter with celestial figures or a journey through the heavens, that, when interpreted, reveals the shortcomings of Aristotelian physics and the truth of Bruno's infinite animistic cosmos. Furthermore, this book and its companion, Idiota Triumphans, served as Bruno's self-defense in literary form. Mordente was angered by Bruno's earlier writings and tried to suppress them. Bruno counterattacked by writing these two new dialogues, casting himself in a positive light. The title, Idiota Triumphans, already suggests a satirical reversal. The idiot, unlearned, triumphs over the supposedly learned, perhaps poking fun at pedants. The interpretation of the dream might portray Bruno as the wise interpreter unlocking profound truths from a dream, while his adversaries fall to grasp them. Given Bruno's sharp tongue, we can imagine the dialogue contained biting critiques of academic Aristotelians. What's particularly intriguing is that Bruno chose dream interpretation as a device. Dream interpretation has a long legacy, but Bruno's usage likely has a philosophical spin. The dream could symbolize the outdated worldview, something fantastical that people took as real, and its interpretation would mean waking up to the new reality. If we consider that only 1 year later, Bruno wrote Kabbalah of the Horse Pegasus, which is similarly allegorical, satirical attack on pedantry, it fits a pattern. Bruno, in these works, mixes erudition with humor, myth with argument. In summary, this book showcases Bruno's literary flair and boldness. It is philosophy in disguise, using the interpretation of a dream as an allegory for discovering truth. Through this dialogue, Bruno continues to champion his revolutionary ideas, but in a playful, imaginative form. It also reflects Bruno's embattled life. We see him at the height of controversy in Paris, fearless in destroying the whole peripatetic philosophy if need be. Not long after these events, Bruno left France for Germany, as even the relatively tolerant Paris was becoming dangerous for him. This book, therefore, can be read as one of Bruno's last shots fired in the intellectual battles of the 1580s, a dream form which he hoped European thought would finally awaken. And now, back to his wanderings. In mid-1586, he traveled to Germany, a patchwork of independent states and universities offering new prospects. He first tried Marburg, but the Lutheran authorities there refused to let him teach due to his controversial reputation. Bruno then went to the more liberal German city of Wittenberg, the heart of the Protestant Reformation, where Martin Luther had taught decades earlier. Amazingly, Wittenberg University welcomed him. From 1586 to 1588, Bruno taught there as a professor, giving lectures on Aristotle, the very philosopher he so often attacked. Bruno's time in Wittenberg was relatively calm and productive. He tempered his open criticism of Lutherans' doctrines and found protection under the humanist Duke of Saxony. However, after 2 years, the religious climate shifted. A more conservative faction gained influence in Wittenberg, and Bruno's position became untenable. In mid-1588, he left Wittenberg on uneasy terms. Bruno next traveled to Prague, where the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II maintained a court fascinated by alchemy, astrology, and the arts. In 1588, Bruno presented the emperor with a manuscript, apparently his work Articuli Centrum, 160 theses against the mathematicians and philosophers of this time, and he received a small stipend of 300 thalers for his effort. However, Rudolf II did not offer him a permanent position. After less than a year, Bruno moved on again. By 1589, he was in the Lutheran German state of Brunswick and settled in the town of Helmstedt. There he briefly attained a position from the local duke and taught the Calvinist-founded University of Helmstedt. But Bruno's stay in Helmstedt went awry as well. He could not resist speaking his mind on religious matters. He argued for broad religious tolerance, that different Christian sects should coexist peacefully, an idea far too crazy for that time. In January 1589, the Lutheran superintendent in Helmstedt excommunicated Bruno from the Lutheran Church. Though an excommunication in a Protestant land did not carry the threat of execution, it did mean Bruno lost the Duke's protection. By 1590, he had to flee yet again. During these restless years in Germany, from 1586 to 1590, Bruno continued to write prolifically, and mostly in Latin. He composed several scholarly treatises that expanded on his magical, mnemonic, and cosmological ideas, often dictating them to his friend and secretary, Girolamo Bessler. Among the works Bruno produced or begun in this period were De Magia, On Magic. It is a systematic exploration of magic in which Bruno defines magic as the practical application of natural philosophy. He distinguished natural magic, using hidden properties of nature akin to science, from divine magic, spiritual elevation, and from negative demonic sorcery. Bruno saw the true mage as a wise man who understands the bonds of sympathy connecting all things. And then we have On the Bonds in General, from 1591, an original treatise on the forces that bind and influence minds and soul. Here, Bruno applies his understanding of love, desire, and imagination to explain how magicians and charismatic figures can bind others to their will. It's a pioneering work in what we call psychology of persuasion, analyzing everything from erotic attraction to the manipulation of belief. And then we have On the Composition of Images, Signs, and Ideas, from 1591, a work on mnemonic images and the art of memory, continuing Bruno's earlier efforts in Paris. He provides detailed methods for constructing memory schemes using symbolic images, often astrological or hermetic symbols, to organize knowledge. This text merges Bruno mnemonic technology with his magical philosophy, asserting that arranging ideas and potent images can unlock deeper powers of the mind. And then we have the so-called Frankfurt Trilogy of 1591, a series of sophisticated metaphysical works printed at Frankfurt on the threefold minimum and measure, on the monad, number, and figure, and on the innumerable, the immense, and the unfigurable. In these, Bruno elaborated an entire system of thought. He posited that the universe is constructed from fundamental units: atoms of matter, atoms of spirit, monads, and atoms of space and time, minimal geometric points. Centuries before modern atomic theory, Bruno describes an atomic cosmology where matter and soul are both composed of indivisible units, and change is seen as their recombination. In De Monad, he explores unity and the mystical significance of numbers and shapes, showing his deep affinity for Pythagorean ideas. De Immenso returns to the theme of an infinite cosmos, adding mathematical and speculative arguments to bolster the ideas of an endless universe with infinite worlds. These Latin works are dense and not widely read today, but they demonstrate Bruno's effort to create a coherent philosophical system, one that combined an atomic theory of nature, an infinite cosmology, and a kind of mathematical mysticism. There is one of these books from the trilogy that I would like to talk about a little more in depth: On the Innumerable, the Immense, and the Unfigurable. This book represents the culmination of Bruno's cosmological and metaphysical thought. While On the Infinite Universe and Worlds was a lively Italian dialogue aimed at a broad audience, this book is a dense, systematic treatise, written in a mix of verse and prose, aimed at learned readers. It dives even deeper into the idea of infinite cosmos and addresses the mathematical and philosophical underpinnings of infinity. To put into context, Bruno's Frankfurt Trilogy comprised of, on the very small and minimum, On the Monad, Number, and Shape, and On the Innumerable, the Immense, and the Unfigurable. Together, these works form a grand synthesis. On the very small and the minimum deals with the infinity small, proposing a kind of atomic theory or minimum principle for matter, space, and time. On the monad, number, and shape deals with the unity of things, introducing metaphysical units, monads, that combine to form reality, bridging arithmetic and ontology. On the innumerable, the immense, and the unfigurable, our focus deals with the infinitely large, the structure of the universe at the cosmic scale. In this book, Bruno shows the order of the worlds with proofs. That nature is an infinite whole. He methodically argues that the universe has no fixed boundaries, no center, and no end. The term unfigurable or shapeless suggests that you cannot encompass the universe in any definitive geometric shape or figure. It is boundless, so you cannot draw it on a map or model it as a closed sphere. He takes pains to refute any last vestiges of the Aristotelian finite sphere. By 1591, Bruno had gathered more intellectual ammunition. He references ancient and Renaissance sources that hinted at infinity. He was aware of Nicholas of Cusa's idea of the infinite universe, Lucretius's infinite void, and other such currents. He even engages with contemporaries like Francesco Patrizzi and others who were exploring non-Aristotelian cosmologies. One 17th century admirer, Abraham von Freckenberg, later wrote that Bruno's concept of space in De Immenso was akin to the Kabbalist's notion of Ein Sof, the infinite divine, no end, essentially God as space. This captures Bruno's idea of God with an infinite universe. This work is structured into 8 books, written in hexameter poetry with extensive prose commentary. Bruno uses this format to both enchant and reason. The poetry praises the infinite creation, while the prose unpacks the dense arguments. He reiterates many points from the 1584 dialogue, but now with more rigorous argumentation. On the infinity of the worlds, there is an infinite multitude of worlds, stars or planets, truly without number. Bruno insists no matter how many are discovered, there are always more beyond, ad infinitum. The infinity of spaces, space, the universe, is immeasurably vast, having no outer edge. Thus, motion, place, and orientation are all relative, an early grasp of the relativity of spatial reference frames. Absence of cosmic center. With no boundary, there can be no single center. Every world can be considered a center from its own perspective. Bruno even says the center is everywhere, the circumference nowhere, echoing a medieval formula for God. Worlds are similar. All celestial bodies are made of the same elements and obey the same natural principles. Earth is not unique. It's one of the planets, and the stars are suns. Animated universe. Consistent with his earlier stance, Bruno affirms that the universe is one, infinite, immobile. The form or soul is one. The matter or body is one. A quote in which he unifies all existence under one principle. Everything has life. There is a universal spirit that manifests in individual souls. This means not only is the universe infinite in extent, it is also internally unified and divine. Bruno's metaphysics in this book is strikingly monistic. He often refers to the One, following Neoplatonic tradition. He claims God, nature, the universe, substance, form, and matter, or all aspects of one same reality, just understood differently. To avoid outright accusations of atheism, Bruno sometimes phrases it as everything emanating from God, rather than being identical with God. But readers like the later German philosopher Jacobi would indeed label Bruno a pantheist, and connect him to Spinoza's idea that God is the infinite substance of the world. Bruno's own nuance was that while God is fully immanent in nature, one could still speak of God as the unity that is above particular things. But this was subtle, and many thought Bruno erased the creation distinction altogether. An interesting aspect in this book is Bruno's fusion of mathematics with metaphysics. He doesn't shy away from the mathematical infinity. He discusses geometrical figures, the idea of the minimum and maximum, and paradoxes of the infinite. In his dedication of the trilogy to the Duke of Braunschweig, Bruno outlines how each part connects understanding, mathematics, and reality. For instance, De Minimo explores the idea that even as the universe is infinitely large, it is also composed of individual minima, a sort of atomic theory that ensures the infinite doesn't become a formless mush. De Immenso then deals with how those innumerable parts form an infinitely vast structured whole. Bruno was effectively trying to reconcile the continuum, infinite divisibility of matter and space, with atomism, discrete units, and with the continuity of the cosmos. It's an impressive intellectual spiderweb, one that prefigured later debates on calculus and physics. And before we continue, we will wrap this up now for part 1. We will continue with his wanderings in 1591 in part 2. Hope you all enjoyed, and thank you for listening.